Hi everyone, welcome to Project Pack number 10. My name is Molly.
Hi, I'm Martha.
My sister. This video is part of a series we are calling Zentangle Legend. I'm so excited. To learn more about Zentangle Legend, please watch our Project Pack number 10 introduction video. Today we will be using this custom booklet which comes in your Project Pack video. But if you do not have this custom booklet, we always encourage and invite people that do not have the Project Pack materials to follow along with whatever materials you do have. And if you are interested in purchasing the Project Pack number 10 Legend booklet, those are available from certified Zentangle teachers and at Zentangle.com.
So by now you've probably started filling some of your pages, and I am sure they are beautiful. And we're excited to offer another page for you. In these videos, we'll be working through some more ideas, different tangles and tangulations for your legend. And of course, you can follow along with us and do what we're doing, but if you have something special you want to add to your legend, we always encourage you to do that. Of course, this legend is yours to write, or tangle, that is.
So today, Martha and I are going to be working on the spread that is numbered L11. And it is in the legend booklet, and it looks something like this. It has sort of these little triangular banner-looking shapes to it. And just like all the other templates in the legend booklet, there are 20 spaces to go along with your 20-sided die, explained in our introduction video. And what we're doing is creating a theme for each one of these spreads to have a little bit fun exploring tangles and sort of digging deep into types of tangles and just making a pretty type of key to work with. So before we get started, just to let you know what we're going to be using for tools, we will have our pens here, and me and Martha are going to be using a black 01, a brown 01, a graphite pencil, and a tortillon. The theme of these pages that Martha and I decided to work with is tangulations, or what was the other way you worded it?
Like tangles with common strokes.
Right. So for instance, there are a lot of tangles out there that have evolved over time. So the original form of that tangle has become something different over time. And both of them have value as tangles. So we might play with some that are like that. Then there's other tangles that when they're finished, they actually look kind of similar. And even though the process of getting there is a little bit different. And then there's also tangles that have variations. And those are kind of exciting because they use the same sort of approach, but you can do them in different ways to get different results. So we're playing with a bunch of them like that. We're going to show you, I think, maybe 4 today, and then hopefully that will inspire you to go out and think about this and add more that you can think of.
Yeah, so you could even choose to just fill one triangle with a tangle until you find its tangulation or its mate.
Yeah.
So it could be a little bit of a hunt.
Yay. All right, so let's get started here. Are you ready, Martha?
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'm going to start with my brown pen. Really doesn't matter. As we said earlier, this legend booklet is yours to work with, and I am going to use all brown in my little pairing here, just so because I want to. And I'm going to be filling in these 2 spaces that kind of make this cool sort of flag or banner. And you can choose any, it doesn't really matter. There is no wrong or right. And I thought it would be fun to play with a tangle we call flux. And flux is one of those tangles we talk about a lot in the terms of tangulations, only because it has taken on very many forms, and we often laugh about it, but it was also one of the original tangles. And before
it has personality,
it does it has personality. But before Zentangle came along, my mother Maria was a lettering artist, and her passions were illuminated letters from the Middle Ages, and she really studied those patterns and used them often in her work. And flux was actually one of those patterns that you see in a lot of these very, very old manuscripts in the borders, and you'll see it very often in Maria's work as well. So I am going to do my version of original flux as close as I can, but it might even be a little bit different. So here we go. I'm going to start from this corner and sort of zigzag my way up. But here is the basic shape of this flux, and it is a lot like, to me, sort of like an apostrophe. Like if you were to draw an apostrophe, I mean, that one's a little bit backwards, obviously, but it's sort of that shape where we're traveling up, around, almost like you're going to create a circle, and then you stop and then pivot down, so you have this kind of pointed area. And then I'm going to travel down here and create another one just the same, and then maybe one more down there. And I'm going to go over on the other side, down, some of these falling. Something like that.
You can see how those beautiful strokes perhaps had something to do with the evolution into muka as well.
Very much so. I think so. I put one there on the top. And I often see in the versions that my mom does of the original flux is she often puts these perfs in underneath. So I'm going to add those. And notice how I'm just sort of smushing these circles into this space. So that flux shape is one you may sort of work with a little bit. Maybe you have another piece of paper working where you're kind of playing around with that stroke. And that's okay to kind of work with a stroke for a little bit to try to figure out, oh, what is that shape? So it's really, I'm just going to put in a little one right there. So let's do another one. Now I'm going to kind of almost like it's zigzagging across the other way here. So again, the shape is going around, almost like this circle is going to go all the way around, then I stop and come down like that. Going to put another one underneath it. Around, stop. I think muka does have some similarities. That would be a fun one to play with too. And I notice people draw their muka so different. And the way we drew muka when we first introduced it really evolved as well, because it became more sophisticated and it had this exciting evolution. And it's fun to kind of play with all the different versions, I think, anyway.
Well, it's a wonderful practice, and I mean that in a way, not that you have to get better at it, but to build it into your repertoire. You use it regularly, and that is how you discover those little evolutions, those little iterations that make a tangle your own tangle.
Yeah, you sort of one day you have, you're in kind of a wild mood and you sort of make it a little bigger here, or you maybe veer off into one direction, and things become sort of apparent that maybe you didn't see before, which is kind of fun. All right, so I'm going to do, I think, one more zag over here. Let's see, we'll do another nice circle around and down. You might even notice as we draw this how this might have a little bit of Renaissance flourishy look to it.
I think that brown pen certainly emphasizes that
feeling
as well.
Something you might have seen in borders or in moldings, marble statues. So I like the way this is going. Once I have all my orbs and everything in, I usually go back and sort of fill some of the spaces. Little ink. But I think now to sort of make this section pop, I'm going to put some line texture in the back. And I'm just going to play with my pen a little bit, and I'm going to show you guys how this can really add to a tangle just by adding sort of almost like a background. So I'm going to start here, and the lines are just going to be straight lines. And I'm just kind of drawing lightly, but at times I let my pen go a little heavier. So the lines have sort of an inconsistency to them, and to me this is something you can play with. So I'm zooming in here so you can watch again. So right here I'm just sort of light, little hard, and then maybe the opposite. It doesn't take that much, but it is kind of cool how it makes different textures. And this just makes the flux pop out a little bit. Here's that bigger space. I can maybe show you a longer line. So light, heavy, light, heavy, and it sort of gives the line a little bit of character. And almost finished here. I think we got all the space here. We'll zoom back out. All right, so as you can see, sort of a really simple kind of enhancement, but it really makes that flux kind of pop off the page. So I love that trick. Love to play with lines. All right, so in this next space, I'm going to do a different version of flux. And so this is a little bit of Rick's approach to flux mixed with sort of how I do flux. So I would say it's like sort of a hybrid of both. And it's started off with this idea and became something really different. So instead of doing this sort of like apostrophe shape, it's going to be a little bit more of a teardrop shape. And I'm going to start and just go right up the middle here, going back and forth. And so I'm going to be playing with this basic teardrop shape, something like that. And then inside each one, I'm going to put a little spine, sort of feathers towards the middle. So right now I'm just working my way all the way up the middle with some larger teardrop shapes, and then I'll go back and fill in the spaces with some smaller ones. I often use this tangle. I love its sort of lush, sort of organic feel to it. It kind of fits in. It's almost like at the height of summer when everything's full grown and you get these beautiful vines that grow in between everything.
It also fills a space quite quickly.
Right?
Like your garden that grows overnight. You're like, how did it get so big?
And it kind of can grow around things too, so you can kind of put it over and under things, which is nice. So as I get up here, I'm just kind of inking in the background. And then I'm going back and I'm adding, where the space is big enough, I'll add another mini one in. And where the space is a little smaller, I'll just ink in with my pen. So I want to kind of hit every space. By adding the little bits of ink here and there, you kind of can allow the tangle to sort of pop off the page a little bit more. All right, so as you can see, we have two versions of Flux, and they actually look completely different. That looks beautiful, Molly. I love it. So I am going to just kind of take the opportunity of working on the opposite side of what she just did, and I'm going to use my black 01 pen just to play around with those opposing ideas, if you will. And I think what I might do is actually, with my pencil, I'm going to just start out with a quick little string, and I'm going to do a tangle called Diva Dance. And there's many iterations of Diva Dance, and I'm going to show you a few of them. So with my pencil, I'm going to just put an X down towards the bottom of the wide band of the triangle. And just using that as a guide, of course. And with my pen now, I'm going to do my sort of primary lines that I'm going to build off of. And Diva Dance has a randomly not straight line. So I'm going to start out with just something like that. And like this, right over my pencil line. And then I'm going to add some interesting drama, if you will. Right along, I'm going to work sort of inside each one of these triangular spaces that's left behind. So along my line, my sort of lumpy little line here, I'm just going to add a few sort of, I don't know, pods of ink. Like that. And then really this is what Diva Dance is all about, is I'm going to aura these lines and the inky lumps that I've just created.
Is that a technical term?
It is a technical term. I've been working hard on how to describe that. There. And as is when you're working on a tile or any other surface, even though this is maybe a little bit more awkward with your book here, but you really should still take advantage of turning your work surface as you go. On my aura line that I just drew, I'm adding another few lumps of ink. And then I'm going to aura that line. And I'm going to keep working my way inside this triangular area.
So Diva Dance is actually a Zentangle legend as well.
It is.
So Diva Dance is the name of a tangle, and it was a tangle that was created as a gift because we often give tangles as gifts.
We do?
Long time ago.
We do often do that?
The story goes, one of our very, very dear Zentangle legends in herself is Miss Laura Harms, and she came to, I think, our very first Zentangle seminar.
First or second, I'm not sure. Maybe the first.
All the way from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And
which is in Canada.
She created a blog called The Divas Challenge, and her being the diva. And every week for many weeks, she created these very wonderful challenges. And
not only that, but created such a wonderful Zentangle support place and inspired so many Tanglers across the world. And for her 100th challenge, in celebration of all her challenges she had done, my mom created this tangle for her and called it the Diva Dance. And that is the story behind Diva Dance.
Well, it's from the beginning has been one of my favorites for sure. And I love the texture and drama it adds to a tile. And it has so many variations, almost nearly endless.
It's actually a really great newsletter we put out that time, and my mom created a wonderful illustration that went along with it. So if you ever find yourself going through the Zentangle newsletter archives available on our website, it's fun to go back to some of these really old ones.
Well, it's new to you. It doesn't
I know
matter.
it might be new to you, but the one where we released the Diva Dance was a really fun newsletter.
So you can see there's not a lot of variation of what I'm doing here. I'm literally every line I sort of add some ink and then aura the line. And my inky little areas are, well, by design, all slightly different in size, and they're slightly different in shape. And the inconsistency of them all is actually creating a pattern, even though it's because they're all so different. It's this really interesting texture that gets left behind. It's almost hard to see when you're working on it. You have to sort of take a step back and hold it away from your up-close vision, and you'll start to see this really neat thing that's happening. And it forces you to draw a line that you wouldn't have necessarily designed, because you're just reacting to what was already there, sort of the magic of aura, not having to think about what's next. So I'm going to now work on this end, and it's going to grow all the way to the tip of my little banner shape here. Sort of filling in where there isn't any other ink. You can see now that that original X is not quite visible anymore, but was just a guide to get you started. You could really start with any shape as a string, anything to grow on. Might be fun to use a letter or something, kind of hide a little message in your Diva Dance.
That's a good idea.
Just like when we're designing a tile or a page in a journal, you want to try to have a combination of texturing tangles and tangles that have a lot of ink and tangles that are more organic and curvy, and some that are grid-like and metered. It's kind of just adds much more interest to your composition as a whole. I'm going to add a few of these auras without any of the darker inked in spaces. And the idea behind that is that in the end it'll be part of how we shade it. We'll leave some lighter spaces behind. Another thing to keep in mind when working with auraed lines is, even though we're working with curvy lines, the spacing in between each time we draw an aura, the goal is to have it be somewhat consistent because that adds to the overall appeal to your texture, your pattern. There, that looks pretty cool. And now we're going to do a variation on Diva Dance, another Diva Dance, which is the Diva Dance Rock and Roll, which is all the same strokes, but we're going to do them in a spiral. And this is such a beautiful tangle, very floral and organic. And you can use varying sizes of your spirals, and they're all just going to grow together here. So I'm going to start in this larger area space that we have. And if you've never done it this way, you can watch for a second. So we're beginning a spiral, and right away I just halt. And I'm going to add my first little lump of ink. And then I'm going to continue on my spiral, and then you'll see why I did it right away, because I need to be able to react to it and aura that lump. But now I've got to go catch up to where I just left on that line and add some more ink. And then keep continuing my spiral, auraing the lines that were there. And around we go. Adding ink here and there. And then going back and auraing the line. And the more inconsistent they become, the more interesting your lines become. You can even, if you step back a minute, can see how beautiful and sort of cabbage rosy they start to take on. So I'm going to stop this one, and I'm going to start another one pretty close by. Starting my spiral and stopping and adding my first lump. Might seem awkward at the beginning, but you'll get into a rhythm of line work and ink work. This is one of my favorite tangles, and so it's relaxing for me to draw this, but I can remember feeling not so confident at one point in time with it. And if that's where you are right now, just remember to take a break, have a look at what you're doing, take a minute, relax the grip of your pen, maybe turn your book a little bit so that your hand is relaxed, and try to enjoy, get into a bit of a rhythm with it. And if your rosettes, I guess you could call them, bump into each other, you can just work on drawing behind in the, like we do with Hollabah. Remember to vary the size of your inky additions. How fun is it that I'm telling my hand to do the same exact thing, and yet they're all coming out different?
It's fun to see them together like that, kind of see the difference in how they look.
Mm-hmm. Maybe one more small one here.
That's great. I like the white space around there. It kind of
Yeah, I mean, I've done it where it's solidly packed with rock and rolls, but kind of like the white space as well.
Okay, Martha, I love the way that came out. It's beautiful.
Thank you, Molly.
You're welcome. All right, I am going to add another one here, and I think I'm just gonna work in this space right below where.
Not that space.
Why?
I'm just kidding.
You scared me for a second there. It really doesn't matter which spaces you pick. But we are working in these little triangular shapes, so if you wanted to pair them up next to each other, you could, but if you decide to do it a different way, you can do it that way too. So I'm going to go back to one of my favorites here, and it's also a very original tangle. It's one of the tangles I feel like that when I see it, I'm like, Zentangle, and that's poke root, and it is one of the few tangles that is actually has a namesake that is something that looks like it.
It exists.
It exists, yeah. So a lot of our tangles have sort of nonsense names, or they have names about the time they were found or where they were found, and poke root is actually inspired by the poke root plant. It is what some people call a weed that grows in a lot of different places, but it does grow here in New England on the eastern coast of the United States. And it is actually one of those plants you find right about now. So you can see I'm starting to
like in the
pop up.
sidewalk.
Oh yeah, it ends up in like
it's never there on purpose. But
It needs no dirt to grow. It ends up in like the most ridiculous places, and you're like, how could a plant that big grow from so little? And it's quite remarkable. I find it to be quite beautiful, and it looks something like this. But the truth is, it doesn't have to look like this. It can really come in many different forms. So poke root is a berry. In reality, it's a bright purple berry, but in this Zentangle world, it's in black and white. And when I draw my poke root, I like to begin with a stem. And I like to make my stems a little thin, maybe flare out at the end a bit. And maybe I'll zoom in for this first poke root. Then I like to cap it off with maybe a little curved line, sort of like a sad face.
No, not a sad face.
I know, it's a little sad. And then I am going to draw a circle around here that sort of allows the stem to, like this. And as you can see, the stem is where I stop my circle. And I want this kind of place where the kind of gives you an illusion of the stem poking into the berry to be closer to the middle. And that sort of makes it look like a stem with a berry. So I'm going to continue to draw these. I'm going to draw another one over here. Little smiley face, nice circle. Draw one coming up here. And there's no rhyme or reason to how these berries kind of fall. The more sort of layering and piling up, to me, makes it kind of interesting. This one's gonna fall behind here. And then I'm gonna start to grow them off of each other. I'm not worried about where the stems have to come from. Kind of fall behind. Especially when I'm starting a new tangle, I try to not draw it too tiny, because it's hard to play with something when it's really small. I think it's easier to start drawing bigger, and then you can play around with smaller versions later. Poke root is definitely one of the tangles that was part of the Zentangle method from the beginning, I think.
Did it come before poke leaf?
You just ruined the next part.
Oh no. Was that a big reveal coming?
Spoiler alert.
Well, the truth is I can't remember which one came first.
Chicken or the egg? I think poke root came first, but I'm not sure. You'd have to ask Mom. So in this space, I'm like trying to smush them all in there. I like that illusion of how they look all kind of smushed all the way to the sides, but you might have a different approach of how you like it to fit into your space. Everybody has a different sort of way and style, and that's kind of what Zentangle's all about, that there's room for all of us. It'd be really boring if they all looked the same. I actually feel like poke root's one of those tangles that the way I draw it has evolved over time. When I early on had a much different style with it, and it sort of evolved as I drew it more and more. So once I get to the top here, I'm gonna start to go back and maybe fill in background spaces with black. I always spend time going back into my tangles and kind of adding sort of finishing touches. To me, those really make a difference in my work. It's almost like just adding love and adding a little bit of a darker line here and there, maybe sculpting the original line. All right, so that's poke root, and I love sort of having my poke root fill the space, like almost like it can barely fit in there. And on this side, I'm gonna do poke leaf. Very similar tangle. Like we said, we're working with these tangles that are related or variations of the same, and poke leaf is just that. So I'm gonna once again start with my thin stem here.
It's kind of like you and me.
Oh, Martha.
Kind of just variations of the same.
I'm the crazy version.
Well, what does that make me? I guess that makes me straight. But...
Oh, geez, that's funny. All right, and then for the leaf, it's sort of like, to me, it's like an upside down heart. Does it look like that to you, Martha? Kind of a...
Absolutely.
And you might play around with how your leaf is, how you do that shape a few times. And you might have a slightly different approach to me. There's no right or wrong way to do it. Kind of curls up at the bottom here and goes to a point at the top. And again, I tend to work big to begin with because you can always fit like smaller ones in afterwards. And I am eventually going to ink this in, so kind of jumping the gun right there. And maybe they get a little smaller as you work your way up. These two tangles are quite fast moving, so you can fill a space pretty quick. Unlike Diva Dance, which takes a little bit of time. And again, I like to spend this time afterwards going back and kind of, I like to fill in the background, but you know, it doesn't mean you have to. You might have a different idea. So that's poke root and poke leaf.
Those look fantastic, Molly. I love those. Very vining, growing, leafy
Thanks.
pokey.
You look good.
Yeah. So I'm just going to work maybe just opposite of what she just did. And our idea was that in this legend page, we would be working on one side with black ink and the other side with brown. So,
But you could alternate, and that.
oh
looks
yeah,
really
you
cool.
could
And-
mix them up. You could.
And we'll show you some samples of the same template that we did in different ways afterwards.
Yeah, we'll show you some different ideas. So working opposite hers, I'm going to work with two different tangles that aren't necessarily tangulations at all, really, but they do have this sort of similar after effect. Sort of a meta pattern from one resembles the intended pattern of another. So they're just kind of a fun little comparison to play with. So the first tangle that I'm going to work with is called Well, and I'm just going to work with the basic well structure, and it is a fragment that fills a square grid. So with my brown pen, I'm going to draw a grid, a square grid that is relatively metered to the best of my hand-drawn ability. So you can see about how far I'm spacing my parallel lines. And even when I'm doing simple strokes like this, I tend to really take my time and be purposeful with how I'm putting down my ink, because when you rush through things, even the simple things, you can kind of tell. So I like to take my time. And working with perpendicular lines, I'm going to create the other axis, if you will. And ultimately what I want to end up with squares, but we're fitting it into a triangular space, so many of them will be cut off, but I'd like to have a good amount of them. There. So the basic beginning of this fragment is to draw a circle in the center of each square. And however big your circle is, I would just suggest that you try to keep them all the same size. So I'm kind of guessing where those circles might be as the squares disappear under the paper, under the edge there.
Sometimes these tangles that you lay out sort of in these sort of layers are kind of fun instead of doing like all three steps in one section.
This one is definitely like a magic trick.
Yeah, it's cool.
Sort of. So now what we're going to do is we're going to work with a technique called take off and land. And basically what that means is I'm going to start my next stroke on the circle as I take off, and I'm going to land on this corner. So if you've never done this tangle, I'm going to have you watch. And I'm working with a bit of a curve. So it looks like a number 9. And I keep that idea in my head. Maybe if you're left-handed, you can work with the opposite angle. But whichever you choose, just be consistent.
I often have to repeat myself with this one.
I actually say 9 in my head when I do it. Number 9. So there's a couple of ways we can do it. We can do the whole square together, or we can go through and do all in one direction, and that's tend to be the method that I use. So I'll have you follow along with me. I'm going to do all of these in this direction. And it's got a bit of a curve to it. I'm taking off on the circle, and I'm landing on the corner. To me, this is, I have a much higher rate of success if I do all of the same shapes in the same direction, and then turn my paper. So now I'm going to turn my book to the right, and I'm going to do the same exact thing, working into the next corner here. Number 9. And you see how I take off on the circle and it's like landing a plane there. I'm landing on that line. I'm not drawing it straight. This one I have to get creative here. It's true that when we work through these steps, sometimes it looks like not much happening here, but it does evolve quickly. So here we are, we're going to do it again. I've turned my book, and I'm going to now take this number 9 shape to the third corner. And then finally, the last one. And what is obviously a pinwheel shape, once they're all joined together, there's something else that starts to happen. So that's just lovely in its simplicity, but we can see that there's this accidental shape that reminds us of another tangle that we do in a very different way, and that tangle is Huggins. And so I thought that would be fun to pair those off as a comparison, if you will. Not really a tangulation, but sort of borrowed strokes. So Huggins is a grid tangle of another sort, and that is we don't start with lines as a grid, but we start with circles, or I don't know, we always like to use the analogy of a pegboard, so I like that in my mind. It helps me imagine how things might come together. So I'm going to draw a series of pegs and then join them together with some curved lines. So I'm going to start by putting my 2 first round pegs down in the corner, not too close to the edge, like this. And I'm going to end up filling these in as I go because it'll help me with the creation of this tangle. But right now I'll leave them open. And then I'm going to draw 2 more pegs, but I'm going to follow the lines of this triangular space that we have to work in. So these next 2 pegs are going to be slightly closer together as they follow the edge. And then once again, and working my way up this banner shape. I think I'll stop there. So now we're going to join these circles together. And the basic shape we're going to work with is a curve that resembles an old-fashioned telephone handset. I used to pick up the phone and say hello. Molly doesn't remember that. She's a little too young for that type of phone, but we will forgive her for that. If you want to watch me for a minute, that's maybe helpful. And it's going to use the same type of technique, this takeoff and land technique, where I'm going to take off on this circle and then land at the bottom of this circle. Taking off, arcing around, and then landing. Now I'm going to do the same thing on these 2, but I'm going to do it in the mirrored image, the opposite way. So I'm taking off from the right and I'm landing down on the bottom left. So I'm taking off and then landing. And I'm going to work my way down these pegs, each time mirroring the stroke I just did. I'm not sure how I'm going to do down here yet, so I'm going to leave that be for a second. Now I'm going to turn my book like this, and I'm going to link these together. And for these two here, you can see how the arcs are arcing inward. So my strokes to connect them will be on the outside. And I'm going to use the same technique of taking off and landing. Now to link these two, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to arc inward like this. And then working on the outside. And then the inside. So we're getting kind of tight there. Now, the only thing I would say that we could add to this is perhaps extending what we've done as if it's going off of the banner.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So the way you want to do that is the same. You're going to be observing the same thing. So I'm not going to draw lines that go across the lines that I've already drawn. So I'm going to have to come inward. See that? And it's going to be the same for this one.
Huggins is definitely one of those high focus tangles that you have to really pause, and sometimes I'll draw an imaginary line first to make sure that I'm going in the right direction.
It's true, yeah. I do a lot of that
tricky
as well.
Martha, what's the legend of Huggins?
Oh, well, there is a legend of Huggins. So here on the end, it's hard because it makes sense to me, so I'm trying to describe. So you wouldn't want to draw, again, an outward line here because you'd cross this one. So you're going to want to come inward, and then you do the opposite. So I think, again, this was an early on Tangle that we were teaching. And for those of you who don't know me that well, my last name is Huggins. And I have the most wonderful mother-in-law named Nancy Huggins. And
she's a CZT.
She is a CZT. Actually, there's two Nancy Huggins CZTs.
What?
I know. The other gal is really lovely as well. Anyway, Mom and Rick were sharing this wonderful idea of Zentangle with family, and you know, they talked about patterns, and they were talking about, you know, all these wonderful ideas. And I believe the way it went was that Nancy said, well, my girlfriends and I used to draw this fun pattern when we were kids, and it was a basket weave pattern, and that was what they called it. And yeah, she showed it to them, and they thought, oh my God, this is so cool. And it really actually, I think, was an eye-opener to be able to see how other weaving patterns came together, sort of how to break down a pattern.
It was the start of our seed tangles.
Yeah,
really.
The seed tangles. And so I think right off the bat, you can see these common shapes that have formed. We call it a Huggins shape, but it's a hug, yeah. There's an accidental shape here in well, but an on-purpose shape here, which I think is so very cool. So anyway, I thought maybe we can, I don't know, add a little bit of interest to this basic Huggins. And we can add some aura lines, perhaps. We can go around the outer edges here. The truth is, depending on how you look at it, I'm calling it an outer edge here, but if I were to flip the book, it becomes the inner edge. So I'm doing all of these outer edges as I look at this vertically. And then I'll turn the book, and then the outer edges are actually the former inner edges. And I'm going to aura those lines as well.
I like how they get smaller as they go up too. That's pretty cool.
Well, again, just adapting to our shape, it kind of acts as our string. Let's see, what have I forgotten? Well, we can do this one now. And another thing you can do is just to take away from all the lines is to add is to sort of ink in these original pegs. I'm leaving a little bit of a highlight in the center, but you can fill them all the way in if you like.
Yeah, it adds a little bit of contrast, which is nice. Breaks up the
and
way the eyes
also with all the taking off and landing on these pegs, sometimes they become a little wonky, and this helps you sculpt them back into nice little orb shapes. There.
That looks great.
All right, Miss Martha, we're on the home stretch here. I'm going to add a little bit of graphite, or let's be honest, I never add a little bit of graphite. I usually add a lot. I'm going to add some graphite to this original pairing I did. And I think what's cool about doing this background line work is it shades really cool. So I'm going to go with my pencil and sort of create a little bit of shadow sort of around these flecks on the lines. So I'm going to do this one area and show you. Then I'm going to take my tortillon and I'm just going to blend that graphite into the lines a little bit. I love the way that looks. And I'm going to go around and do that on all of the flux. I'm also going to add just a little shadow right here on each one, just to kind of add a little definition, maybe a couple of the overlapping places. All right, so I think I got almost all of those in. The graphite, I love the way it looks on top of the brown and then layered with this texture in the background, really makes those pop. And for this variation of flux, I'm really just going to play with using the side of my pencil here to put down a nice soft line of graphite, but I'm just going to go work up sort of this center here. And then again, just using the tortillon to kind of fade it into the leaves. I think I might put a little shadow here all the way up the side. The seam, just to make a definition, but sort of optional. So that is the two versions of flux. Love the way those came out. So fun.
Very pretty.
So different, right? But they actually have the same origins. All right, so now my next one I'm going to be doing the shading on is the poke leaf and poke root. And there's a lot of different ways you could do this. If your poke root and poke leaf are smaller, then I might do it a little bit differently than I'm about to do it. But because mine are so big, I'm going to play around with putting sort of an aura of graphite on the outside. I'm going to show you just one so you can see what this looks like. on each berry. And it looks something like this. Let's really defines the three-dimensional bit of it. But if you have sort of smaller berries, that probably won't work. And you might try sort of just playing with the overlapping of them more so than trying to define each berry. And both options are fine. But different sizes and spaces give you different opportunities. Because the trick with shading, I tell this to my students all the time, is it's very different than coloring, because you really just want to have enough of a hint that creates contrast with the white space. So you're not trying to fill in the whole space, you're trying to emphasize a highlight. So by adding shading to one area, the white space would become more apparent. And I sometimes almost spend more time shading my work than I do.
Sometimes?
I know.
She's so shady.
Ha! Shady, crazy, all that. But to me, it's sort of this opportunity to take these two-dimensional drawing and just dig into it and sculpt it and play around with it. And I have so much fun with it. And it changes. It really does change the work. Because a lot of times I'll look at things, even these, I'm like, it's cool. And then I'll see it all shaded up and I'll be like, oh, it's so neat. All right, just finishing up here. I think I'm good on my poke roots. I might afterwards add a little edge shading, but I'm gonna see what my poke leaves. I'm gonna do a similar approach. Again, my poke leaves are nice and big, so if you did a smaller leaf, which is totally fine, it has just a different look, then you might shade a little bit by just paying attention to the way they overlap, or maybe you shade all along the borders. What's so fun about Zentangle shading is there's no specific wrong or right way to shade. You can actually pick up on all different approaches. You can shade the whole tangle, you can shade just the space. A lot of times I'll just go all around the edges and just kind of define the space, which is usually a very successful approach. I do that a lot. Sometimes on the same piece, I'll do it two different ways. Again, there's no rules. You get to choose and explore and take chances. It's such a great place to take chances because it's just pen and paper. So you can go out on a limb, can try things you'd never try, and see what happens, because there's always another tile, another piece of paper. Okay, very cool. And what's cool about shading too is if you look at it from arm's length away and you're like, oh, it's not that dark, you can always go back and add another layer of graphite, which is often what I do. So I might look at an area and say, oh, I feel like I could add a little more, make that a little darker, and that might just pop out that particular one a little bit more. Really keep going back and forth forever, but. And then I think what I'm gonna do as like another layer is just, like I said, I tend to like a lot of graphite, so if you're not into all of this, that's fine. You might say, okay, Molly, I'm gonna leave mine the way it is. But I'm trying to create a little bit of a shadow in between these two. All right.
That makes such a difference. I love that. Very nice, Molly. So I am going to shade this section of Diva Dance, this first section. I think what I'm going to do is add some shading towards the edges to sort of highlight the center. So I'm using the edge of my pencil, and I'm making actually sort of, I don't know if you can see it. I'm making a triangular shape of graphite in here. On the smaller auras of this original shape that we penciled in. And then I'm going to spread it, but I'm going to make sure that I'm leaving that center X shape unshaded, just to sort of draw attention to it. You might find that you want to shade it a completely different way, which would also be fine. Especially with these very textured tangles. There's really no limit to what you can do. So you can see you're highlighting that original X. It's kind of cool. And then I thought I would play along the idea of how we left some of the auras without any drama to them. And so I'm only going to add some graphite where I see some drama ink. And just appreciating how this graphite smooths into the paper so nicely. And then maybe I'll add a bunch at the tip here. So that's kind of fun. You can probably appreciate that even more by holding it at arm's length. And if you feel like you want to make it even darker, you could go back and add even more graphite. And then with the rock and roll over here, I think what I'll do is anytime I see that one of these flowers is going under another, I'm just going to add some shading. I'm just emphasizing that illusion, even if it's a little bit on the edge there. And because I left that white space, I'm working hard to stay clear of it. I'm going to give the effect that each one of these is kind of stacked on top of the other. Over here with well, I'm going to go and just add some graphite with the edge of my pencil around each one of these circles that we put in the center of our squares. Working hard to keep that center white. This is one of those tangles that if you shade it one way, it can look completely different than another way. It can really change the whole thing. This sort of emphasizes the pinwheel effect of it. And just with the graphite that's left on my tortillon, I'm just softening the edges around this triangular section. And then with Huggins, it sort of begs for that over-under emphasis to be addressed. So I'm going to, all of these longer shapes here, I'm going to put some graphite as if these are going under. So just on either side. You know, as I'm looking at this, just going to finish up. I like how Molly finished her edge right here. And just so that we have some ink here. And on these, I'm going to do the same thing as if these are going underneath that panel. I'm being mindful not to get any graphite on the center of these shapes. There, so that has a cool weaving effect. So I think this is a great start to L11, legend number 11. So yeah, these are the couplings that we worked on.
Tangulations or variations of one tangle. And honestly, you probably could fit this in other templates in the book, and really the sky's the limit with any of this, but it's fun to explore and play with how tangles can sort of present themselves in different ways.
Well, and how they relate to each other, you know, even if they don't come from the same origins, they can have some borrowed attributes.
Totally. So Martha and I were actually working on our own booklets at the same time, so we have some in process. So just to show you how even the same template can look a little bit different.
Right. So here's one that I was working on. Maybe some other ideas that you can work on. I got started with these aurad reticula, if you will. This is Mulligan, and this, well, it started out as Tripoli, but it's multi-shaped, but with the same principle, and then they can each get filled with a fragment. These are two variations of bales.
Yeah, how different, right? Love that.
And then some fun variations with Crescent Moon and spiraling tangles.
And as you can see, she filled hers differently too. So on the previous one, we did the creating these triangular shapes, and she put them together in rectangles, which is super cool. So so many different ways.
No rules at all. And then Molly,
on this one,
some cool ones too.
So on this first one, I played with these two tangles, which are two completely different tangles, but in this instance, they become very similar. And this is Crazy and Zeppel, and then Crazy Floors. They're drawn a little bit differently, but the results are kind of similar. So that was a fun little
It's almost like one's a negative image of the other.
Right,
it's really neat.
Yeah, so kind of fun. And you draw them differently, which is kind of neat.
Mm-hmm.
I also did Crescent Moon, but mine came out totally different than hers, which is
two different complete variations from
and then also doing Tripoli, she had done one similar to that. And the Printemps also, hers was a different direction. So it's like going in so many different directions. And as you can see, I filled the triangular spaces, but I alternated the colors. So just to see that there's not just one way to do these. So Martha, do you want to add a couple of ideas to the end?
Yeah, there's actually a very unique legend that we're calling prompts and challenges.
And honestly, this legend page too, I guess you could fill with whatever you want, but we thought it would be fun for each of us teachers to add a couple of different ideas for you guys. But honestly, you should go ahead and add your own. But this is a fun page to go to when you're feeling like you just need maybe not a specific tangle, but maybe an
approach, maybe, or a state of mind.
Right, some specific ideas. So the first one I was thinking of, Martha, because of where you live, I thought it would be fun to maybe use one as like tangle at the beach or tangle out in nature, or if you don't have a beach.
Yeah, what about nature? Why don't we put that one down?
Okay, I think that would be
What
fun.
number do you want to make it?
Oh, how about 5?
Oh, dang.
Okay. And,
tangle in nature.
We're all doing these, so I hope we're not overlapping. Julie's going to do some, and my mom's going to do some, and Rick's going to do some. But
I love it.
I think that's a good one. And then how about teach a friend to tangle?
I love that one.
Or maybe a family member, or whatever it is.
I think teach a friend is good.
Teach a friend, yeah. So roll the dice, and it's now your job to find somebody to share a little tangle time with. And then, oh, here's another one. And I see so many CZTs that do this often, and I always think it's the sweetest thing. And we call it practicing random acts of Zentangle.
Wow, that's a good one.
So if you don't know what that is, that means to create some sort of Zentangle art and leave it somewhere. So I guess actually it could be interpreted so many different ways, but to perhaps if you eat at a restaurant and you leave a tile behind when you leave, or maybe you go sit on a bench at a park and you leave a tile behind for somebody to find. And it's kind of this quirky thing to do, and
it's fun to just think about what that person might react.
Yeah.
You know, the fun, great, wonderful feelings that you can offer somebody, even a stranger.
Right.
One of the things that I like to do when I'm at home, if I have time to myself, is to put on just some of my favorite music to relax to, and maybe tangle to music.
Right? Because sometimes it's weird how like music affects.
Yeah, it's sort of like when you're in the car and you hear a kind of upbeat song, and you find yourself driving faster. It can have a similar effect. So I'm going to put that one down. That's one of my favorite ones, is to tangle to music.
And a lot of times music helps you escape from whatever world you're in to this other place of calm, because it sort of drowns out all of the sounds that might be distracting you. So, all right, let's do one more. How about, and this could be something you also do outside or inside or at a museum, to go and tangle hunting.
Yes, I'm going to put that as number one.
Okay. And
go tangle hunting.
And it's amazing. You don't have to go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art to do it, which would actually be a great place. But you might actually just go to Walmart, because you never know what you're going to find.
Or you might go in the bathroom and look at the tile, or right down the hall and the rug in the family room.
You might go look at the architecture in your town, or you might go anywhere. There's definitely patterns all over the place, and tangle hunting is something quite exciting. So you might take maybe a little journal with you, or a camera, or something that you can capture some of those ideas with you.
Can we add one more?
Okay, one more.
One of my favorite things to do is, because as we evolve through our Zentangle practice, we, in our own minds, start to feel, I think, more comfortable with the art that we're creating. So it's kind of fun to go back to an old tile and maybe add something to it that brings it up to your current level of tangling. So I don't know, revisit an old tile or something?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, I know. What does Midori call it? Midori CZT. She calls it resurfacing.
Resurface an old tile. Yeah. Those are great. So yeah, feel free to fill in your own fun ideas. And I know that Maria and Rick and Julie had some other thoughts on how you can just inspire yourself to keep on.
Keep on. And maybe your list gets shared with another friend, and so that they can use your list, and it might be
that's a great idea.
Yeah, so we can share different ideas, because it's kind of an endless one.
Yeah.
Well, Martha, I enjoyed tangling with you today.
Thank you, everyone, for hanging with us and spending your time tangling, and we can't wait to see your finished legends.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.